Alrighty, there we go. We are live. Hello to everybody watching this. If you registered for the event pre-date, or indeed if you're picking this up in your feed on LinkedIn as well, thank you very much for joining us. We can see some numbers on the top of the screen in terms of who's joining us live, but we've also got our registered event attendees who'll be logging into this, watching this right now. So appreciate you all joining us. Would love for you to share comments, tell us where you are in the world, tell us where you're joining from, introduce yourself in the comments, and of course throughout this, ask any questions as well. If you're watching this back and it's not live, thank you for taking the time to watch it. Obviously, you won't be able to comment and ask us questions in live time, so apologies for that, but hopefully you'll get some value out of the content nonetheless. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our guests and what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be having a fun, positive debate and discussion around whether SDRs and sales reps should be working from the office or working at home. And what we're looking for is what's best practice. So, there are all sorts of different opinions on this right now, and we're looking to get a sense of what do people in sector think? What do people think is the right balance? What is the right setup for primarily SDRs? And we're very much focused on that role. And before we get into the topic, we will just pop around our panelists. We've got Tim Johnson, who is from Visualsoft. We've got Georgia Benham from Air Marketing, and we've got Kaitlen Kelly from Klaviyo. Kaitlen, I wonder if you could just unmute yourself for a second, and I wouldn't mind if you could just spend a minute or two doing two things, give us a bit of background on yourself, but also just set the scene in terms of your take on this topic at the beginning of the discussion. And let's see if it's the same at the end.
All right, fantastic. So hello, everyone. I'm Kaitlen Kelly. I'm a sales manager over at Klaviyo. Quick little background on me, originally from Seattle, Washington area, moved over to London about 3 years ago to help with the global expansion of the outreach team. And now I'm over at Klaviyo, overseeing some AEs, which is fantastic. So outside of my sales manager role, I also founded SDRs Anonymous, which is kind of ironic that we're having this conversation. So a little background on SDRs Anonymous. This is a community that I actually created back in March of 2020 when we went into the pandemic. And the idea behind this is, how do we create a community where we can actually share knowledge, bring other leaders together, and people trying to break into the sales development function, as well as SDRs who are just breaking into the space. So it's an opportunity for people to still get that shoulder-to-shoulder learning in a remote environment. This, of course, has evolved over time into quarterly events where we're bringing on different leaders to share best practices and people who have been in the SDR role as well. So with that being said, a little bit about me. You can tell my passion is around developing people that are passionate about sales careers. So my position on all of this, for whether it's remote or in office, is I'm a big advocate for hybrid working. I know that's like, choose a side, Kaitlen. I'll go in. Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot to be had of in-office work experience, and there's a lot that you can get out of it. And so I also understand there are benefits from the remote side. So I'm an advocate for hybrid working, and I'll dive into that a little bit throughout the conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Quick question on that, and I don't need context, just the answer. Has that changed in the last 2 years? Would you have said that 3.5 years ago, or is that your opinion now?
Oh my God. If you would have asked me 2.5 years ago, I would have been like, somebody give me a remote role, please. Let me travel the world. Let me get on with it. Yeah. But yeah, I would say, like, as I've gone through, as an SDR, being completely onboarded 5 days a week, then to building and scaling an entire org, kind of fluctuating between hybrid, in office, and fully remote. My position, has definitely evolved over time. So I definitely see the benefits of both, but lean heavier towards the office environment.
Yeah, fair enough. Lovely. Thank you. Tim, coming to you, if that's okay. A bit of background on yourself and just your take on this debate today before we start talking.
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Tim Johnson. I'm the VP of Sales at a company called Visualsoft. We effectively are an e-commerce platform, digital marketing provider. So we've been in the digital space for over 20 years, but me personally, I've been in sales. I started out my career a long time ago as an SDR, and learned the hard way through trial and error and building teams and building systems. And I'm somewhat of a sales geek, I guess, in that regard. I've read over 50 books. And what I've learned, I guess, in all of that time is every individual and every business is unique. So I don't want to cop out and say it depends. But I think you can exaggerate any one point to try and prove a point. But for me, I'm office first. When it comes to SDR roles specifically, I'm very much hybrid for certain elements of the role, but we try and promote an office first approach.
Brilliant. Thank you. And on to you, Georgia.
Hello, everyone. So, Georgia, I'm head of client strategy here at Air Marketing. I've been with the business now for just over 7 months. So my role is focused on working with our account managers across sales and marketing and helping our clients build sales pipeline that turns into positive outcome. My background has always been in customer generation, demand generation, and like heavily performance marketing. So I've been in that for around 10 years. I guess in the previous roles I've been in, they've all been very office based. And I guess that pretty much states my position that I'm going into the conversation today, which is I think there's a huge benefit from being in the office, especially from, learning through osmosis, hearing conversations in the business and collective problem solving. However, I will caveat that with the fact that it can't be a one size fits all. There are situations where learning, like working from home, can be positive, but my steer is definitely majority of time in office.
Brilliant. Okay. And look, guys, just to lay things out, we were due to have Landon with us as well, whose opinion, and he may well still be able to join us partway through the conversation, his opinion is completely the other side of George's, that very focused on actually it should be remote, and we'll potentially add some balance to the conversation as well. So I'm going to have to play that role. I think I'm going to have to play that role today. What I would say is my role is going to set out some ground rules in this discussion. I'm going to play devil's advocate as much as I possibly can, because I think ultimately people watching this and listening to this will want to be asking questions that challenge your mindset. They may want to applaud your opinion, I don't know, but don't expect that bit from me. If you want to challenge each other, you're absolutely welcome to do that. So we will have differences in opinion. The idea is that we're having a healthy conversation, a healthy debate. So please do challenge each other or ask each other to justify something. Naturally, keep it professional. We are all friends, so let's be kind and nice as much as possible. But I know you all well enough to know you're nice people. There is a rule around agreeing with each other too much. We don't want that. That gets a bit boring. So let's not agree with everything. I will try and share the discussion and point questions to you so we know where we're going. And to the people watching this, if you have questions for anybody in particular or just generally for the panel, feel free to put them in the comments and I'll do my best to put those to the team. And in the meantime, continue to let us know where you're from, whether you're remote or working in office, what you like about it. Share your comments and feedback throughout this conversation, because I'd love to get input from people watching. So let's start with a really obvious point around this. When we think about hiring people and you have an office in London or in New York or wherever, we're in Exeter, there is a certain pool of people who can work for you, who can commute into the office. So by the very nature of doing that, you limit the people that you can recruit from, the pool of people that you can recruit from. How much of a benefit is it genuinely to break that rule, to go and hire people elsewhere, to go and hire people that might be cross-border, 200 miles away, 100 miles away? Surely there's got to be a benefit to some degree of having more choice or of having people that might otherwise not be able to work for you. And Georgia, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right on this one. What's your take? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you ever come back on that, I'm not sure. You'll have to unmute there.
It's difficult because I think there's definite benefit from the pool of candidates being larger, and I guess it can often give you access to maybe skill sets that might not typically be in your area. However, I guess it comes with the caveat of, without having any sort of like geographical boundary, what you often happen is expectations can get blurred. So, for a candidate coming in an SDR role that might be looking at a London wage now comparative to what you have in Exeter, it sort of level of expectations change. And I think that's something that can be quite challenging as a business that's not based in central London to adapt to. I think in terms of finding new recruits, definitely positive, but ramp time, onboarding, getting people bought into company culture, I think is where the main challenges seem to lie.
Makes sense. Tim, what's your take on that?
I think as you grow, we've seen massive changes as the company's got bigger and bigger and bigger. I think once you get to a certain size, one of the big challenges that you have as a business, I think, is general communication, not only between managers and their teams, but also individuals across multiple departments and so on. And when it comes to SDR roles, statistically speaking, on average, these people are going to be enrolled for 1.5 years if you're lucky. These people often come in and will want to progress to other roles within the business, or let's be honest, it's a relatively challenging role for a lot of people. If it's the first time they've gone into a sales role and they're starting out there and they get a lot of rejection and they don't stay, they'll often move on. So I think it's a trade-off. I think that the value of being able to access talent anywhere in the world. I believe that with SDRs, because they've got a lot to learn in a relatively short space of time, I'd rather have that time with them and close to them and teach them and be more hands-on. And it partly comes down to, I guess, the culture that you want to build as a business. And for me personally, I have this kind of statement that I always say, and I want to build a team of missionaries, not mercenaries. So often with SDR roles, I want people that have got the bought into the long term. They want to be part of what we're trying to do as a business overall. They're not just looking for a job. They're not just looking for something that they're going to be in for a short term.
Yeah, makes sense. Ken, I'm going to come to you, but I just want to add some commentary to this that you might be able to also comment against. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and what I've learned with this topic is that everyone's got a story that proves it. So, we have to be conscious that it's one example. Somebody who actually said that to me 2 years ago, we open up, remote is a great opportunity. So now we're getting talent from everywhere and it's brilliant. There are two things that they particularly learned from doing that, and this is their experience, not fact. One, it works really well with senior roles, right? Because at a senior level, it's hard to find, it's a niche skill set, fewer people, candidate pool is smaller. And so it's worked really well for them at that level, but not so much at the junior level. And two, what it actually does is just gives you still the choice of a different candidate pool. It's not like you suddenly open up and speak to 1,000 candidates instead of 100. You just speak to a different 100. So you're still in the same position. It's just they're based further apart. So they were very much the opinion of having done it for 2 years that they're reversing back to, we want our SDRs and sales teams being local, being in the office. But senior roles, we're quite happy to have them remote. They're more prepared to travel. They're paid more money, so there's more compromise there. And ultimately, it is harder to find those people round the office. I don't know what your take is on that, Kaitlen, but it's interesting to hear that insight from somebody who's tried it and done it.
Yeah, that feels actually really familiar. So one of the previous companies, that I used to work for, is that we actually went to the remote first, and one of the locations we're doing the remote first, the other one stayed with, we're going to hire locally, make sure we have the opportunity to kind of have the in-office experience if and when we do go back to that environment. So really, with my viewpoint on all this, it does go back to what Tim had mentioned there, is when I think of like the SDR team, this is like your future sales team. This is your farm team. This is where you're investing, you're developing. A lot of these candidates are very green. It could be their first time within a sales career as well. So if you feel like you don't have the opportunity or your talent pool is limited, I'd probably challenge you to expand where you are looking and kind of get outside of the box there. There's so many different industries where you can pull, people that want to get into sales, whether it's like a fitness industry. We've had like personal trainers who've made the switch over, or hospitality, or even like tapping into different backgrounds outside of just like, fresh grads. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm definitely is like hire kind of local to your area. That way you do have the opportunity not only to have them in office more often, but as they do graduate and move on throughout your sales org, they're going to have the resources available to them if they move into like the CS role, AE role, whatever it may be. The opportunity will be there from them. Otherwise, you could run into the risk of having everyone completely remote, and then you wouldn't be able to kind of build that culture and environment that you're looking to achieve early on. Could add limitations.
I've got a really interesting question here from Piyush, and he said, what are the personality traits of an SDR to be hired for work from home role? And I think, do you know what, it prompted an interesting thought in my head, which is that we all 2.5 years ago I say all, people that weren't working remote at the time or had their SDR teams in the office went, yikes, we've got to send everyone home. And I don't think that many, if any, organizations stopped and thought a different type of person does well working from home to working in the office. And perhaps we should have all shifted the type of person profile that we were looking for, and we might have got a better outcome rather than having to go through what, and this is first-hand experience for us, the process of dealing with people who just can't work from home and who don't like that setup, aren't best in that setup. And we had a number of those people that you then have to coach through a new thing, or ultimately, you know, don't perform as well as they need to stay in a role. So let's look at Pierce's question. What are the personality traits of an SDR that is better working from home than working in the office? And Kaitlen, I'll start with you if that's all right. I'll maybe ping back around the other way.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I actually haven't thought about different SDR traits if they were going to be in office or work from home only. I would kind of cast an SDR overall. And a couple of the key traits that I look for is, I think the first one is kind of around humbleness. So as I'm looking for an SDR and bringing somebody on, whether they have experience, fresh, you know, first sales role, you know, I want somebody who's going to be humble. They're going to be eager to learn. They're going to be willing to ask for help when they need the help. This will also tie back into their coachability. And so I'm looking for somebody who's going to be humble. And then I think the second thing outside of, you know, anyone going into a sales role is going to be driven, motivated. I would say the second most important thing to me is like naturally curious. They're not taking things at face value. They're eager to learn more. They're investing in their own self-development and continually trying to find ways to get creative to kind of break down different barriers that they may be facing. So those are two of the traits that I lean in really heavy on, is the humbleness aspect, which will tie back into the coachability, and then also the curiosity.
Yeah, I love that. Tim, any thoughts? Do you think you need different traits if you're going to work from home as an SDR to an office role?
I think certain traits that you need, regardless, would be exaggerated. I just think. So for me personally, I like people that have got a strong work ethic. I like people that are naturally curious. I like this kind of can-do kind of attitude. Just, I know it's old school, but it kind of is still effective. But I think if you're working from home, you don't have that like immediate support around you. So I think you have to be a lot stronger at problem solving and being able to pivot and for want of a better word, wing it. Because if you're on your own, let's be honest, when you're working from home and you're on your own, sometimes you need to be able to give an answer to something in that moment straight away. You haven't got the luxury of just going, can you help me, somebody? I've got a question here. I know you can start to slightly bridge that with software, but it's not the same. So I think the main thing for me would be if I was looking for someone that was going to work from home, honestly, I would try and find somebody that has already done that before and it's not something that's new to them. So I'd try and look somebody that's worked from home in a sales role before, and I'd look for evidence where they've been able to be a self-starter and be curious and find solutions and find problems that they can solve on their own without being spoon-fed. And I think the SDR role in general has evolved massively since I started out. No longer is it just there's a script, pick up the phone and do it 100 times. They have to be able to communicate on multiple levels. They have to be able to communicate on multiple channels. So if you're going to be working from home, you'd need evidence that they are a strong communicator, not only on the phone, but on video conferencing and email, like all these different levels. And you'd need evidence that they're really, really strong at it, because you're not going to be close enough to them to be able to monitor it, or most sales leaders aren't going to be close enough to them to be able to monitor it. So you'd have to make sure that you pick them well. Yeah,
interesting. Do you know what? There's a really nice reminder here that we talk in code in sales and tech sales. What's an SDR, says LinkedIn user. I love the way some people have dialed in, and thanks to the Workday crew are hanging out on here, and we've got a couple of SDRs from Workday who've dived in and answered the question. Sales development rep, and I think we often go off in code, don't we, in our sector, and talk in acronyms that it's interesting to see that we assume that everyone knows what we're talking about. Sarah and Justin, thanks for that. Georgia, I'm going to actually throw another question at you rather than keep on this. I think there's some good points in there. Sarah's asked us a question around, have you ever experienced difficulty establishing a good culture in a 100% remote setting? And I think, look, this word culture seems to be almost like a go-to in this topic. It plays a really heavy role, hard to define, but, in my experience at least, it has been far more different, or at least far harder, or at least very different to establish culture. And I think organizations have had to change settings. The culture that we drove before pandemic was all centered around the fact that you're there together. The things that happen to influence a culture are no longer effective, or in some cases are redundant because you're not physically there. So as an organization, you had to shift. And I wonder whether your take is that organizations have found that harder, and what might be driving that, and whether it is genuinely harder to build a culture and a positive culture when you've got people 100% remote, or is that a myth?
I think it's challenging because let's reflect to pre-pandemic. I think working from home, at least in my own experience, has been very much not the norm. So, you know, establishing culture, which is a very subjective term, is, you know, it has been difficult in an environment where you're adapting over the course of, you know, quite a short period of time. You know, you haven't really taken a step back to have a think about what systems do we have in place. You know, am I hiring for certain personality traits? It's not something that I've ever, you know, typically thought of before. I think you know, when building a team and establishing good communication, you know, I guess a space where people feel comfortable coming forth, asking for feedback, there's definite the physical barrier of working remotely. You know, it's not as easy just to listen to somebody else on the phone, hear the objections that are coming up against, you know, tweak, adapt as you go. We don't have that opportunity in the same way remotely. So it's definitely challenging. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think you need to really sort of like, I guess, redesign the way that you're working to allow for that to happen. But I definitely say that the norm, and I think probably the majority of experience people have, is establishing that workplace culture of collaboration, increased productivity, camaraderie in a in-office setting rather than working from home. So I don't think you can compare them equally, because one, I think most people have more experience in than the other.
It's interesting. I'm gonna just throw something in that might be deemed to be a bit of a challenge on something there, which is around, you know, I've had this thrown at me in the past, and it got me thinking around, is it that it's harder, or is it that we're just not as good at that? So, you know, we're used to building a culture a certain way. Suddenly we've got to do it another way. Maybe we're just terrible at it. And there are people that have been doing that for years and years who are probably exceptional at driving culture in a remote environment. And we maybe just need to be open to shifting our mindset and changing a little bit. And perhaps we would get a better outcome if we were able to shift that mindset and not be hanging on to the pre-pandemic world of everybody in the office. I had that a little while ago, and it got me thinking, at least.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like you don't really, when things pivot very quickly, you know, everybody's reacting to a situation where they've got to change the way that they're working overnight almost. So there was never really the opportunity from the get-go to switch what the strategy is. I guess if you redesign the way that you operate, I think there are definitely efficiency gains and ways that you can improve productivity and, you know, collaboration while working remotely. I just don't think probably the paths are as defined or maybe as obvious.
Yeah, interesting. Sarah says she agrees with me. By the way, that wasn't my opinion. I'm just asking the question, Sarah. Appreciate the comment and the question. Really good question, Sarah. Tim, so let me come to you on this. Is it harder? Is it genuinely harder to build a culture with remote people? What are the things that you would use in an office that you just don't have, and that you see as a weakness or perhaps a compromise if you're building a remote team?
I think the main thing for us at Visualsoft, we went hybrid working 5 years pre-pandemic. Like we did it as a choice, not we weren't forced to do it like a lot of businesses are forced to at the moment. Like we did that a long time ago, and part of it was because our top level culture was happy staff, happy clients. We believed that if we created the best environments, it would attract the best talent that would then allow us to give the best service and in turn have the happiest clients. So for us, the culture isn't just a Visualsoft hoodie and a Visualsoft water bottle or whatever. It's not the way that you work every day. Like when you come into our offices, it feels like Visualsoft. That's the best way I can describe it. Is like when you come into head office or any of our offices, it feels so that the colors, the messages on the wall, the general feeling, even when you walk into reception, the laid backness, the kind of, we have really corporate people come to our building and compliment us on how it feels when they get here and how they're treated. And that's part of our values. That's part of what we instill into the whole team. And it's hard as you get big, because as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and you come across multiple locations, we even found it hard to replicate our Teesside culture when we opened the Manchester office. Do you know what I mean? So let alone going fully remote, it was challenging even to replicate it across multiple locations. And we tried our best to try and make mini versions of the office and carry some things over. And each location has their like variation of it. But it is definitely harder to do it remote, because it's a feeling you get. I know it sounds really kind of flaky, but I think when you're part of a team and you're in and around that team, and the relationships that you build in person are very different to the relationships that you build with somebody on a Zoom call. The walking out for lunch, and I'll give you a quick example. I'll do some of my one-to-ones with some of my BDMs, and we will literally go out of this building and we'll do a walk. You know, we'll walk around and we'll chat, and we'll do it in an environment where we feel we can have really strong communication. It is not the same on a Zoom call. It is not the same remote. You don't build those sort of bonds. And I know that the people that would promote the software that can replicate these things, I work in the digital industry. Like, I can tell you now that buying a wedding dress online is not the same as going to get your wedding dress fitted. I can try and tell you that because I have an e-commerce platform, and that's what I want to tell you. But the truth is, there's certain scenarios where it is just the technology isn't quite there yet to fully replicate what it's like in person. And just before I finish on that, the best book I've read ever, the one that I really believe in, and it rings true with our culture and our values, is a sales book for non-sales selling, I guess, is where it comes from. But it's To Sell is Human by Dan Ping, and it's the human element that you struggle to replicate with the technology. And I think that's the key bit to it all.
I'm most interested in what wedding dress you decided to go with, Tim, but maybe we can talk about that another day. Kaitlen, coming round to you, you've got a bit of a sense of the hybrid working well. If I was to take away the office part from that, would it be harder for you?
So I think there's like a couple things. First thing, Tim, I just want to mention, To Sell is Human was the first sales book that I got gifted to me in like 8th grade by my grandpa. So I think I love it when people mention it. So in the hybrid environment, I think that there's a lot of technology out there that really help you create the culture that you want, instill the culture. I think there's also things that you need to think about when you think about culture, and like, what does that mean? Is it instilling the values and that align with the culture of your team, or are we talking about social culture and camaraderie, and how are we kind of bringing and building those stronger relationships within that? I think within the remote environment, it takes longer to build those relationships. I think a lot more can happen quicker when you're in the office. It's easier, that human element. That's something you can't really replace via Zooms. And then also when you're trying to like establish in a remote environment and try to like the knowledge sharing and sharing all the best practices and making sure people are collaborating and stuff, this could also lead to like Zoom exhaustion. If you have too many Zoom meetings going on, how do you encourage people to like share their wins and share their best practices? A lot of people want to keep that close to their chest. So it's about kind of, as leaders, I think all of this really falls on the leaders, whether you're in office or remote, and kind of being the leader of the culture and instilling these values to make sure that your team's following. Because I have been in orgs where it's been super strong culture, and then you grow, you scale so rapidly. And as you're scaling, there's so many people that are added to the mix that a lot of times you can lose a little bit of that culture or like the beginning feeling that you may have had. So I think it comes down to making sure that the leaders are taking ownership of the culture within their teams and that it aligns to the larger picture.
I posted something on LinkedIn a little while ago, and there was some really interesting comments. And my point at this time was around some of the best times I've had with my colleagues. And they're the colleagues that you remain friends with when you stop working together for whatever reason. Some of the best experiences and memories and some of the friendships that have happened have come from conversations and experiences that weren't in the office, that were at the pub at lunchtime, after work, night out, all that kind of stuff. If you and it's regularity, right? Doing that regularly and having those experiences and sharing that with each other, going for your walking meetings and grabbing a coffee instead of sitting in a meeting room, go all those sorts of bits. And my point was, if you're not in the office regularly, not every day, but regularly, those things don't happen. So if you live in Teesside, Tim, and you've got, you know, you're working closely with somebody who's in the Southwest and in Kent, and you never go into an office together, it's impossible to recreate those experiences. Okay, there are different experiences, but when I think back to my career, some of the best memories are in those moments, and they're the people you take with you in future in life. And I just wonder whether you feel that people are missing out. Like, okay, we accept that you can work remotely and you can do a job, you can use the phone, you can send emails, you can social sell, and you can book meetings and do your job and get a promotion. But is there something we're missing around just life experience, being alive, you know, experiencing the people that we're around? Or is it that people just genuinely don't need that as much as I do, or care about that as maybe as much as I do? Georgia, what's your thought on that?
It's a really interesting question, because I don't think you can apply the same thing to everyone. You know, like some, you know, I guess as humans, we're innately social beings, the majority of us, and actually having that social belonging is a really important part of going to work. And I think probably over the last maybe like 10, 15 years, I think there's been a definite shift in how people have perceived that in terms of importance as we talk more about work-life balance and I guess the introduction of working from home. I think it's entirely dependent on the person as to how much benefit they get out of that social belonging, and, you know, like, you know, having, you know, forging long-lasting friendships at work. I think it definitely, that's the, you know, being able to have exposure to a wider group of people and hear conversations outside of your function, and, you know, outside of, you know, understanding where the business is going, I think helps to, I guess, instill, like, I guess you're more knitted in the company culture and the direction. But I definitely think it's definitely person dependent as to how much that is a feature in where they choose to work, what job they choose to do, wholly dependent on the person.
So on that, let's just establish with the three of you, Georgia, how much do you need that? Like, is that important to you? Could you live without it?
For me, it's really important. For me, in terms of my team, how we interact, how we learn from one another, how we all sort of, like, I guess everybody's development feels shared because we're in the office, we spend time outside of work together. I mean, there's definitely a bridge of, like, cult versus culture. I don't want it to feel forced and feel like people feeling like they have to get involved in things. But for me, in all my roles, that has been massively important.
Tim, how about you? At a personal level, is it important to you?
Yeah, I think as a leader, I like being around the team. I'm at an age now where if they're going out on a big weekend, or it might look like I'll bow out early, I'll have a nice cup of tea and I'm off, but I'll leave them too. But in terms of those kind of interpersonal relationships, it's different for every business. But with ours, what I see that mainly builds in the office, which I've never seen happen not in the office, is it's the cross-departmental stuff. So, like, when you only Zoom your team, when you only have scheduled calls with your team, how do you ever get to know the wider business? And what we find is often when those relationships are built outside of work. So let's say, for example, some of our team are going out on a Friday night after work. It's not just that team that goes out. They go out with other members of the business that they'll get together as an office and say, right, well, we're all going to go out for a bite to eat or a drink, whatever that might look like. And then before you know it, a couple of weeks later, you'll be in the office and you'll need a favor from somebody else in the business that isn't in your department. Or you're, as an SDR specifically, you'll be struggling with a particular thing, and one of the senior BDMs that you happen to be out with last week is more likely to, just because they've got a relationship with you now, to lean over and say, you do it like this, or have you thought about doing it like that? And I think it's very, very hard to replicate that as a company. So if we port teams to one side, I think doing it remotely, it's how do you do those kind of things? And we try and, as a business, put on regular things like not just the Christmas parties, but regular summer barbecues and things like that. And we have all hands where we all come together as a company, because we're trying to promote this kind of, we're all in it is one purpose. The company's going in one direction. Let's help each other. And it goes back to this, we're all on the same mission. We're not trying to create people that are solo and work as on their own. And my fear as an employer, being totally honest, is if you're solo and you're just working to your own devices in your own four walls, you'll work for the highest bidder. So from an employer's perspective, you will no longer feel totally committed to that particular company you work for. You think, why am I working for this Teesside based company? I might as well work for a company in Silicon Valley. I'll work for a company, whoever's willing to pay me the most. And it'd be interesting, I see it in my data, but it'd be interesting to hear from everybody else, for people that you've recruited remotely versus people that you've recruited and brought within. Have you got higher turnover and attrition to staff? And I wouldn't mind betting you have that they don't last as long and they move on quickly, and they want to progress, and not always they want to progress with you. They'll progress outside of the business, which makes it even harder to keep the best talent.
Yeah, and you hit a really interesting point there. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Katie, I just want to get from you really quickly. What's your take on that? For you as an individual human being, how important is it to you that you're physically around people in the environment at work?
Yeah, I think for me in my current role, so I'm a frontline manager. So in my current role, it's very important. Like I'm in the office minimum 1 day a week, typically 2 to 3 days a week. I do appreciate the flexibility of the hybrid environment, which I can elaborate on as well. But I would say, it is about investing into the people. I want to have those strong relationships with the people. I want to have not only a working relationship, but a friendship as well. And so if you're in the office, you have the opportunity to build that type of relationship a lot stronger. Then you do get the opportunity to go out for drinks. You're meeting other members of other orgs, and there is just kind of like the more collaboration aspect that can be in there. Whereas if you're in a fully remote environment, it can be a little bit tougher to build those stronger relationships. Your team may not feel, as invested in sometimes if you don't have that stronger pull, which can you start to see the heads turning for the highest bidder, which is a big issue. And if we're talking about SDRs and in that environment, the biggest thing SDRs are looking for is they want to get into sales. They want to be invested in, and they want to see career opportunity. So how do you create that? And one of the best ways to do that is by building a strong relationship with them and understanding like what their motivations are and how can you help them get to where they want to be.
Yeah, look, I have to say we're all being very nice in this conversation. I just need to say that out loud, but right now. But Tim, I'm gonna bring us back to our point. Actually, just before I do that, I just want to make a point here. One of the things that I'm very consciously aware of, because I really need human contact. That's my personality. I am a textbook extrovert. I get my energy from people. Working at home is like my worst nightmare. Business-wise, we're in a hybrid model because we believe that's the right model for us commercially. But personally, I don't like that. I prefer to be in the office. So I'm in the office 5 days a week. That's just because of who I am. So it's just interesting. It's really important. One of the things I've had to do over the last 2 years, and some of you may resonate with this, it goes through a personal journey of acceptance that I can't run a business or a team based on what I like. You have to run it based on what's right commercially. And of course, that takes into account everybody's desires, and everybody's different. And I think that's been a really interesting learning, because suddenly every option is okay and available where it might not have been before. You have to sort of accept that it might not work your way as a leader. And I think that's been a really interesting point for me. And there is a difference between right and like, what you like and what's right. And sometimes you have to just step back from that. Moving back to your point, Tim, because I think it's a brilliant point. The data around this. So, and I'm going to share our data. This is isolated to our environment, right? So I need to make that really clear. The data is very clear in our business that people who are on remote contracts, so they work 100% remote, have substantially lesser chance of getting through probation, whether they leave or whether they don't hit the results that are necessary in an SDR role to stay in the business, and on average stay with us less time. They churn faster. Additionally, we see an increase in ramp time. Okay, so that is the data within our business. Now, if we pushed everyone back into the office full time, half of our team would leave immediately, right? So it isn't an option to just go, let's just change it and put everyone back in the office. But the data is very clear in our business that it takes longer, they stay for less time, and they're more likely to not get to the level that they need to get to. How do we combat that in remote? And I don't know if you've got any data or any take, or you've spoken to anybody else. Do you feel like that is likely to be isolated to our environment, or do you feel like that's more likely to be the majority of people? Tim, I'll come to you because you brought this topic up.
Yeah, so we again, to be really clear, we actually have hybrid. So whilst we're office first, if people feel like they need to work from home for a day, they can. But we have an approach where we say, wake up in the morning with the mindset that I'm going to go to work, and then on the days that you need to work from home, you can choose to work from home. What we implemented with us specifically is it's quite a steep learning curve, because not only have you got to learn how to sell, you've got to learn an industry, you've got to learn the product. There's a lot of things that you've got to learn in a very short space of time. And what we found was it's that typical kind of how investor people learn. And we found that they learn by, like to George's point, osmosis, being around people, being around other departments, other teams, and so on. And what we did is we even if you're going to be taking a role within our sales team on the basis that it's hybrid and you're going to be working from home, we actually, during your probation, and we set that out at interview, say that for the first 3 months you're in office. So for us, they have to come into an office. Now, for some people that are remote, that can be a challenge, like saying, well, okay, for X number of months, you're going to have to, we'll cover you, but you have to stay in hotels, or you have to travel longer distances whilst you're in probation. But we insist on that, because what we found was when we tried to do it fully induction remote, it was too hard, it was too slow. And I think to put like a balanced view on it, what you'll hear from people that sell software is they'll say there's remote software that will allow you to replicate it. There's remote learning tools that will allow you to replicate it. There's CRMs that will allow you to replicate it. But the truth is, that's even more than to learn. You have to learn how to use that system. You have to learn how to use the CRM. And it's just too much. And for someone coming into a not, I don't want to use the phrase like low paid role, but an entry level role in sales, that's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of things to learn. And it's not always that they won't pass probation because Owen says, really sorry, you didn't pass probation. I guarantee you'll have a set number that just go, this isn't for me. Like, and they'll bow out early because it becomes too much to take in. And you get this, to Caitlin's point, in my experience, we are bombarded by information every day of our lives. You're getting so many emails, so many messages. You might have Slack channels, you might have CRM alert, you got all this stuff going on. And I think it's too easy when you're remote to miss these key messages or miss these key points. So when it comes to things like training, I try and get people, where possible, into a room. I try and get people into HQ for certain things where you think, I want them to take this on board. I want them to learn it and then demonstrate back to me that they've understood it, that they can do it. Very, very hard to do that remotely, in my opinion.
Kaitlen, you're, as SDRs Anonymous founder, you're talking to SDRs across lots of different organizations. What are you seeing and hearing on this front?
So I think that if you're, can you repeat the question just so I can frame this correctly?
Yeah, we're just talking about that data around, people sticking, ramp time being slower, people churning, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think like the biggest thing and if you think about the typical like SDR as well is, we'd mentioned they're very green, they're coming in, they're looking for that community. They want the shoulder to shoulder learning. They're looking for friends in the company that they're looking for. They want to have that social aspect. So in the remote environment, it is super hard to kind of replicate all of that, especially if there's ad hoc conversations happening or going out after work drinks where those relationships are getting built stronger. Outside of just the social aspect, though, is, the native knowledge share. If you're a company that is a scale up or just in a hyper growth stage, you want to leverage that native knowledge that some of your more tenured reps have. And doing this via Zoom could be very difficult because everyone learns differently and it needs different ways to be engaged into the content. And so to Tim's point, bringing them into a room, doing something that's interactive, have them teach it back to you, can help with kind of that onboarding. And then I think the other thing too is the SDR role is hard. And there's a lot of SDRs that are not hitting their targets and don't last longer than a year within the role because they feel like it may not be for them. And so if they're not invested into the people and their teams and kind of have those strong relationships where they know like, wow, I just had a really bad day or a really bad month. If they don't feel like they have that moral support of their team kind of backing them up, then that could be an opportunity of when they kind of throw the towel in and are like, hey, this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not suited for sales. But if you have those strong relationships and you hear and you're next to your other peers who are also battling the same objections, the same struggles and challenges that you are as well, then it's something that you guys can kind of strategize together on. It becomes more familiar and then you're able to overcome that and kind of push through the tougher months. I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits of being in the office is just being able to know you're not in this alone, essentially, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. Sarah's just asked a question about, probably off the back of what I just said there, around have SDRs ever told you they've ever churned because of culture, and do you have weekly meetings with SDRs? So just to give some context on that from our side, yeah, we have weekly meetings with our SDRs. In fact, our SDRs have a 4 times daily check-in with each other within their teams. So we've worked really hard on trying to create that togetherness and that engagement. I still don't think it replaces physically being there, but it certainly bridges the gap between the two. And I have a little story to share on this. We had somebody who is on 100% remote contract as an SDR and has been with us for 2 years. So through the pandemic, hired in the pandemic. We'd never hired a remote SDR before, and did a very good job. We recently had our summer festival, summer party, and he came down from Scotland to Exeter to spend time with us. A day in the office, stayed overnight, party, festival, really enjoyed it. 2 weeks later, he phoned and handed his notice in, and we thought, geez, what did we do to upset him? He said, no, what I've realized is that I need to be with people. I need to be physically present. I need to find a role where I can be in the office some of the time with my colleagues, because being there with people really reminded me on how much I missed that. And it was a really interesting learning, because the guys worked remote for 2 years and done perfectly well, hit targets, good performer. And there's a moment of realization. I just wonder, around that mindset of, I don't have it now, therefore I'm selling myself the idea that this is the best thing for me. Actually, if you took those people and put them in the office, would they start to go, actually, these bits are really good. Okay, I have the compromise of commute and the cost and those sorts of things, and those are considerations, and those are real benefits of being from home. But I get all of these other positives too. Or would they just shut down from that and say, no, actually, those aren't of benefit to me? And I think it's a really interesting point. And this is where I see this as a list of pros and cons. If anybody on this topic is saying, here are all the pros and there's no cons of working from home, or the other way around, actually, there's a big agenda behind that argument. And I think it's about how many pros and cons and which ones are most important to you. So if you've got to travel an hour to get into the office every day versus a 5-minute walk around the corner, your decision making is going to be very different, and your opinion is going to be very different around that. But Sarah, thank you for the comments and questions. Justin's leading us on to the next point. So I think you need the right tools and resources to develop SDR skills remotely. My opinion, lots more support, one-to-one meetings compared to office work, but still possible to develop professionally. I think he makes a point there that none of this is about making it impossible. There are plenty of organizations making it work both ways. But tech stack, and Tim, you've talked about this, the technology you use makes a difference. So you do have to think about what tech have you got available if you're going to have people working remotely. What are the tools that you have seen benefit that remote environment, Tim?
Yeah, so we've obviously evolved as a size of a sales team and as a business, and we've grown over time, and our tech stack's kind of grown as we have grown. So when I first started out, because I'm old now, I had a notepad and a pen. Everything was. Then it evolved into a spreadsheet, and it's evolved beyond that into CRMs and all sorts of stuff. So I think we would have struggled as a business if we hadn't have had our CRM, which we use HubSpot. So I think when everybody was forced to go remote, if we hadn't have had the visibility and being able to monitor what was going on, we would have been in trouble. So I think for sales leaders, you need something that's going to live as your central source of data, I guess, the central thing that's the engine. And for us, that's HubSpot. Obviously, you could choose Salesforce or whichever one you decide, but we use HubSpot. Evolving from that, the tools, I guess, that I've seen that have added value in terms of remote coaching and remote development of SDRs, Refract. I know that you've had the likes of Mark on the show before. Really good tool. It's now a Lego. So if you wanted to coach calls remotely rather than having to sit beside somebody, that allows you to do that kind of thing, which is really good. If your managers have got the time to sit and coach those calls, it still doesn't replicate the in-moment things. But as you start to build out your tech stack, if we then talked about Nook, we talked about gamification, we talked about HubSpot, we talk about Refract, you could start to build out a very expensive tech stack. And at that point, as a leader, you have to balance up, actually, is this the best option and the best value for me? And it's not just the value that you've got to proportion into how much is this software going to cost me. It's actually the debt that comes with actually maintaining and teaching your staff to use those things, because any leader will tell you getting sales people to keep on top of their admin is a challenge. So if you start giving them too much admin and too many systems and too many things, where do they focus? Where do they prioritize? And it can become a bit of a burden. Something that you first brought in that you thought was going to add value can actually become a burden for your team. And again, that can lead to then a disengaged team, and they feel like they're not getting the flexibility. But the main thing for me is it's that autonomy. So to your point about whether or not you like coming in, I like coming in. I like coming to the office every day of the week. We actually give staff at VS, we give them the choice. It's like, if you want to come in, you can. If you want to be from home, you can. And what we found was when the pandemic first kicked in, nobody was coming in, everybody was at home. And then gradually, as teams started to come in, other teams started to come in. And you fast forward to today, even though people have the choice, our teams have the choice of working from home or being in, you can't get a space in the car park. You saw yesterday, I couldn't get a meeting room. Like, people are back now because they want to be back. And when we talk about environments and cultures, it's not about forcing people to do things. I think it's about creating an environment and a culture that they want to, so they feel as if they've got the choice to do that. And ultimately, whether somebody wants to work from home or work in office, there's plenty of employers out there that will be the right culture for them. So I think it's about finding the right ones. And same with the tech stacks. It's about finding the tech stack that will work for you, I think.
Do you know, I think that's a really interesting point, Georgia. I'm gonna come to you on this. Just listening to Tim talk there and thinking about this idea of you kind of pick an employer that's right for you. So as a culture, as a business, there are businesses that will be better suited to working remote because they've always worked that way or they've set up that way, and others that will take a lot longer to embrace remote, who may never embrace that. I still know people who have got people in the office, back in the office 5 days a week. And to some degree, we're going through this new period of learning what's right for us as individuals. And surely we will just find a fit of actually when we go and apply for a job, I'm happy to accept remote, I'm happy to accept in office, or I'm happy to accept hybrid. Might be two of those I'm happy to work with and one I'm not. But isn't that just the way the world is going? Can we really expect all of our employees who were with us 2.5 years ago working a certain way to evolve and all just naturally like that?
I think it depends on, again, it will depend on the individual. I guess through the recruitment process, it's about, I would say, and I probably don't have a high volume of experience in doing this in a remote sense, but I think being really clear on what the expectation is from the get-go. So what's the expectation in terms of, if it is hybrid, then what's the expectation of coming into the office versus being, at home? And actually, if you are working from home, what the level of support is and how that might change to what, you would hope to offer exactly the same amount of support to somebody that's at home versus in the office. But I think it's just making really clear what the expectations are from the employer, so that the employee knows ahead of time that they're accepting the role that's the right fit for them.
Yeah, I think this. It's an evolution, isn't it? And I think, Kaitlen, I'll come to you on this. I'm just keen to get your thoughts around this whole, if you worked in an all-in-office environment 2.5 years ago, and now it's hybrid, it's fully remote, or you're trying to get them back into the office, it's impossible to have 50, 100 people that all want the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is impossible you can't please everyone with everything. So I think the key there is just be consistent with what decision you do go into. But it's also just about, depending on what the rep is that we are talking about in specifics, everyone's going to be in different seasons of their life, and everyone's going to have different priorities that can be influencing, what their schedules look like, whether it is the commute, whether it is they have children, or, you all are probably familiar with Radical Candor by Kim Scott, but it talks about, how you can have like your rock stars and your superstars and the different mentalities that can go into that. So I think it's about finding something that is going to be the most flexible, so that you can have essentially almost a catch-all that will work for everyone, whether that is, if it is completely remote, then just be aware of the risks that come with that and how do you kind of mitigate those risks. If it is a hybrid work environment, then just understanding, what does that look like? Is it minimum 1 day a week? Is it 1 day a month? What does that conversation look like? And how do you bring your team on that journey with you?
Yeah, and also around the hybrid, like what days do you come in? Do you get people in together? Do you get them given complete flexibility, and then you end up with people in on different days, and you potentially lose some of that value? There's lots of detail stuff around that too. Tim mentioned something earlier, and Kaitlen, I'm going to stay with you on this point, just around the other people in the business that aren't in your direct, your environment. So one of the things I talk about in our business is the fact that I sit out on the floor. Neil, our commercial director, sits out on the floor. Our head of sales sits out in an open plan office. If you're an SDR, junior SDR, in the first year of your sales career, and you're lucky enough to hear people with that experience selling, talking to customers, you are exposed to conversations and learnings that are indirect. They're by accident. So you're learning by accident, I call it. And you don't get that unless you create it working from home. And so many organizations aren't creating it because it's a very hard thing to do. It's not a straight line. It's not the priority day to day. And I wonder what your take is on that. Is there a way that we can replicate those experiences and give people the learnings from things that aren't in their lane today?
Yeah, so I think that's a super good question around that. So this is something that we tried to tackle when I was leading the SDR org over at Outreach. And one of the things that we came up with is we did like monthly AMAs. So it's bringing in different leaders of the different orgs. AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. So they'd come in and they'd share a little bit about their org, what are the initiatives, what are their priorities, give a background of kind of their career path as well. Gave the SDR org an opportunity to learn more about other leaders and what they're doing within their specific divisions. And then it kind of gave them insight into that. So that was one way that we also combated it. You can also develop mentorship programs. So pairing up SDRs with people outside of the SDR orgs. So pairing up with AEs, CS, ProServe, or solutions consulting, whatever you may call it within your team. But I think it's, as an SDR leader, it's having that conversation about what are their ambitions, what career path are they hoping to get into, and then you can kind of tee them up with a mentor within that org as well. So then they are getting access to like that broader conversation. Outside of that, like one of the things we always advocated for is we leverage Gong. So listening back to as many Gong calls as you can from your AEs, from your solution consultants you're going to pick up so much product knowledge that will help with the business acumen and kind of help you onboard as well. So I think that's something that's in their control that they are able to do. And then from a leadership perspective is how do you bring together those resources to give them access to learn more about the other orgs along the way. But I think you're spot on with being in the office. You do get access to a lot of like the water cooler chat or, just overhearing other conversations or just randomly walking in with, it could be anyone on like the solutions consultant team or a CSM, and you just strike up a conversation and then you just make a new connection. So I think there is some benefits of that.
Makes sense. I'm just going to bounce questions to one at a time because I'm conscious of time and I've got a few more I want to make sure we get in. Georgia, I'm going to come to you because I know you've talked more about being in the office and the benefits of that. What would you say to somebody who says, yeah, but it costs me £200 a month to commute into the office. I'm on 28 grand a year, whatever it might be. That's a big chunk of my monthly take home. What would you say to somebody if they responded in that way?
Yeah, I think it's what the perceived cost of coming into the office is much greater than it was before people started doing it in the norm. I think I would want to demonstrate to that person the benefit of being in the office versus being at home, especially if they are committed. I guess it's working out ways, it's definitely a difficult question to answer. I think it's about finding ways that you can get that person exposure to the right elements of being in the office. And ultimately, I think to steal probably Tim's praise from earlier, it's about you want people that are really committing to being there. You want volunteers to come into the office, and I would hope that people see the benefit of those water cooler chats, that further development, that actually they will invest in themselves and invest in their own career development, so that if that is where they want to be, they will commit to doing that.
Yeah, interesting. I asked you that one personally. I knew it was a difficult one, so apologies for throwing it at you. But I think that's the joy of this conversation. These are the sorts of things that are coming at us, and I think as leaders, it's really hard to sometimes put yourself in the shoes of people, and it's one of the skills that we need. Tim, you said earlier around giving people choice. One of my concerns might be in that situation, I'm playing devil's advocate here, so read into it as you will, might be that actually by giving choice, you lose control to some degree as an organization. So you end up in a scenario where you've got unfair scenarios or an inconsistency in terms of we only see this person once a quarter, but that person we see 3 times a week. And you've got to manage those inconsistencies and that environment. That must be a challenge, right?
I think, well, what we found is you give them reasons to come in. I mean, so we have regular lunch and learns, we'll have pizzas, like you name it, we'll give you a reason that you want to be in and around the team. But ultimately, everyone's at different levels. I think Kaitlen touched on this earlier. Like your SDRs are not all coming in at the same time, at the same level of their career. So some people need to be in more than others, some people don't. The reason that I like everybody in as much as possible is the new people learn from the people that have been doing it for a longer amount of time. And if the people that think, well, I don't need to be in the office because I know what I'm doing, bow out, it's like, well, where do the new people then learn from? But I actually think that the bigger challenge that you've probably got is what you want as a sales leader sometimes can contradict, I guess, what the individual wants that they see is best for them. So if I give you an example, as an individual, let's say, for example, I'm an SDR starting out, the convenience of working from home, the fact that I don't have to commute, I can get up 5 minutes before my day starts or whatever that looks like. I've got more time at home, and I might be willing to sacrifice some of my performance for that convenience. Now that doesn't work for Owen, because Owen's like, no, I can't afford to drop my sales by 15% just because you prefer to be 15% performing less and have the convenience. But these are real problems. I was speaking to a sales leader last week where they used to do 3 days in office, 2 days at home. And when they changed to 5 days in office, their performance increased by 15%. Now, what that would tell you is, for the individual, they are better off in the office. But are they bothered? So, like, are they bothered about a 15% increase? Would they trade that 15% for the convenience of working from home? Some would. So you're not always aligned in that regard. What they want as individuals isn't always aligned to what you want for a leader. So there always has to be some kind of middle ground that you can find.
Yeah. Do you know what I think is a really interesting point? There's a difference, absolutely a difference between what is best and what works for somebody. Question to Tim. So Sarah's firing the questions off. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate it. Question to Tim. Do you organise shadowing sessions for new SDRs? I mean, you mentioned earlier that they're sort of in the office for the first X period of time. So I'm guessing that's part of the process. Yeah,
we do the same for BDMs as well. So we are really close to them in the first 3 months, and we do it actually where it's a transfer. So often it's the new rep shadowing an established rep, and then they get more involved in the process. We call it taking the stabilizers off, to the point where they're being shadowed, but they're now running it, and then the senior can kind of step away from it.
Got you. And then Georgia said, does your company offer its employees a commuting allowance? If not, does it have a hybrid model that allows employees the option and freedom to work wherever they want? I'm going to put you at the top so we can see your face. There you go.
So to answer the first part of that, yes, we do. As part of when the rules changed earlier this year, it's something that we introduced to allow people a greater option to come into the office. And we also have a hybrid model. We ask that people come in for 2 days a week, but and each team comes in collectively on the same day, so that you get to meet your team, you get to learn through more experienced people, you get to shadow people and things like that. And then we also do, every month we have a day where everybody in the office, it's actually tomorrow, we have a day where everybody in the office comes in at the same time. We run interactive sessions, we run training, we get some of our clients to come into the office so that we get to meet the team get to meet clients that they might typically not get to while working from home. So yeah, we do both of those things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting on that point that we have taken a stance that it's 2 days in the office. Over the pandemic, we've recruited people who are fully remote, and of course we respect that, and they're as much a part of the team, and we have a different mentality with that. But equally, the data has told us that when we can get people engaged physically in the office, we get a better outcome. On average, we've got some great remote team members though. And so we're investing in that. But I think to Tim's point, giving them a reason to come in and not just make it about you got to come in and that's it. So, you know, the compromise is paying for some of their travel and giving them an experience that they wouldn't be able to get at home, you know. And I think that's been a really important focus point for us. I'm just going to, before we wrap up, I'd just like to get and I'll give you a few seconds to think about this. So I'll go first, and then you guys can be having to think about it around just what are the key standout points in the discussion around why we can work in a remote environment and make it work, and I'm happy for you to give both, and or why, you know, being in the office is important. And when I think about this topic, the things that always stand out for me are just that human contact. I think we, over the last couple of years as a society and a business sales community, have forgotten the importance of being physically connected to our, and in the company of our colleagues and people, and the value that brings. And I think we've accepted that it's okay to remote. We've accepted that that's not there. And I gave the example of the guy who came down to our festival and kind of forgotten that. And I do think there's an element of that. I think that as an organization, kind of have a responsibility to help people to be the best that they can be. And if you feel that has a contributing factor, then maybe making some difficult decisions to get people physically in the office occasionally or sometimes or more of the time is important. And I think that it's pretty hard to work if you're a junior SDR, early stage career, shared office, shared home, working in your bedroom. You know, we have a responsibility from a well-being perspective to get people out the house, engaged, learning, developing as fast as they can. And I genuinely feel there's an opportunity to do that better with some office physical attendance. It might not be in the office, it might be a hub with other people, but getting them out of their bedrooms and into a place where they've got a proper desk, they've got a proper chair, they've got people that they might not otherwise be exposed to, like the founder or the VP of sales or whoever it might be, to learn from. On the other side, though, the things that always stick with me are the fact that 2 years ago, you got paid, let's say you were on 30 grand a year, you factored in your £200 a month for travel, suddenly that goes back in your pocket. Geez, what a nice situation that is. Why would you want to give that up? Equally, and I've seen this a lot of people, if you're traveling for an hour a day there and an hour a day back, and you get those 2 hours, there's 10 hours a week of your time that can be put into doing what you want to do, spending time with family, putting the kids to bed, learning to play the piano, speak another language, or developing yourself at your profession. Maybe you're reading more sales books because you've got that time back and that makes you better. And I think these are the things that I'm constantly shuffling around in my head. So I'm just going to come around to each of you. And Kaitlen, I'll start with you. Just what are the standout points for you on either or both sides of the argument?
Yeah, I think the standout points for me is like an in-office environment is having the access to the native knowledge and being able to build strong relationships outside of just your SDR org, which you may only have exposure to if you're in an only remote environment. The second thing is reducing that ramp time. So ensuring that you are, hitting those targets in a quicker way. And this kind of ties back to being in the office, the shoulder to shoulder learning, knowing who is the right person to reach out to, if you do have questions, you can problem solve a little bit quicker. I think one of the cons though of a in-office environment is kind of tying back to that work-life balance. You are going to lose time out of your day on the commute, and you may end up working a little bit longer in some of the days that you are in the office. So I think it's just being mindful of that from a work-life balance perspective, making sure that you do have those boundaries in place and you're taking care of yourself first if you are in an office environment.
Thank you. Georgia, I'll come to you next. Standout points on either side of the argument, though I'm conscious of what you're saying.
And I think, to be clear, my personal stance is that I see a lot of benefit from being in the office. However, I think when you look at a lot of research and a lot of data and you hear, what people find like the standout benefits when looking for a role, flexibility, work-life balance are the things that I think you hear more and more frequently. And as an employer and as a business, I think you have to listen to that, which definitely leans towards the hybrid environment. And I guess it's making it so that people want to be in the office. They see the they see the benefit. You are creating an environment where people see that there are learning and development opportunities and access to people that they might not get in a remote setting. However, you also need to be able to support and create an environment where people can learn, even if they are working remotely. So I think it's about making sure that the training and development opportunities are equal and consistent across both places. However, my stance hasn't changed since the beginning of this conversation. I am very much pro in office, but with a degree of flexibility.
Tim, you get to round up the show with your final thoughts.
It depends.
That's it.
Yeah, I think, the big takeaway for me is, as individuals, we're all different. As businesses, we're all different. The key to it is that expectation. So if you're now an employer that is just thinking about doing remote-based sales teams or whatever, you need to go in with your eyes open. So if you're doing it because you're being forced into it, you need to start to believe in the value of doing it so that you're committed to that decision when you do make it. But going in fully understanding what you will need to change in order to replace what you are currently doing in the office. You'd need to understand fully the software requirements, the training requirements, and so on. And in my experience, a lot of the people that have been forced into it don't have those things. They haven't got particularly strong training documentation. They haven't got particularly strong systems. They learn on the job in and around others. So they need to really plan for that. And then from an employee perspective, same goes. If you're going into sales, you need to understand the difference between the two, and not necessarily rule one out or the other without trying it and fully understanding it, because they are very different. And I think, to touch back onto Kaitlen's point earlier, the biggest challenge when you first start out in sales, and this is the reason most people fail, is buoyancy. You get a lot of rejection, you start to doubt your own self-confidence and so on, and it is very, very hard to stay buoyant when you are on your own. Not a lot of people can do that. They need others around them to pick them up, and that's the hardest bit to replicate.
Fantastic point to finish on. We've had a couple of hundred people dial in today live, and this will be hosted on LinkedIn on our website for people to go and dip into at a later date as well. And I think what we've seen is that there isn't a right answer. There is absolutely choice, but that there are things that need to change according to the situation that you're going to set up. And we've got to take everybody's opinion into account. And that certainly really enjoyed listening to your take on this and your opinions today. I'm disappointed you've agreed most of the time and that nobody's been overly challenging, but hey, we are still friends, and that's the important thing. Tim, Georgia, Kaitlen, thank you so much for joining us today. And to people watching this, thank you for taking the time to tune in, and to people who asked questions and commented as well. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Thanks very much, and we'll see you all soon.